Before we begin, I want to know where you're listening from. Tell me your country in the comments. It still amazes me how far these words can travel, even when they begin in a quiet place like this. What I'm about to share didn't look serious to anyone watching from the outside. There was no stage, no spotlight, no breaking headline. But inside my body, it felt like everything was collapsing at once. This is the story of a flare-up that started with something ordinary, something comforting. A meal. One small decision in the middle of a long, tightly scheduled day. And how that moment forced me to confront truths I had been avoiding for years. About my health, about control, and about the thin line between being loved and being owned. This wasn't drama, it wasn't rumor, it wasn't scandal, it was food. I've lived most of my life inside discipline, training rooms, cameras, timetables that decide when you wake up, when you sleep, when you smile, when you pretend your body isn't hurting. That structure built me. It built BTS. It gave me purpose and gave millions of people comfort during their own storms. I carry that gratitude with me every day. It's real, it's deep. But gratitude doesn't erase the fact that I'm human. For a long time, I treated my condition like another responsibility to manage quietly, another weakness to hide neatly behind the image of an idol who has everything under control. I believed that if I trained hard enough, ate carefully enough, slept enough, and stayed calm enough, I could keep it invisible. I believed silence was strength. Then I ate something familiar, something warm, something that smelled like home. It was late. The room was heavy with exhaustion and low laughter, the kind that comes after hours of rehearsals when everyone is running on instinct more than energy. Jin was talking, like he always does when he senses the mood sinking, that gentle teasing he uses to lift us without forcing it. Namjoon sat nearby, calm, grounded, holding the atmosphere together without saying much. Yoongi looked half asleep but was listening to everything, thoughts clearly moving behind his eyes. Hoseok kept shifting around the room, checking on everyone in his quiet way, turning care into motion. Jungkook was humming softly, not for us, just for the space itself. Jimin kept glancing at me, like he felt something before I did. Someone offered food, simple comfort, the kind of taste that makes you let your guard down for just a second. I ate it because I was tired of treating my own body like a project. I ate it because I wanted one moment that belonged to me. I ate it because, for once, I wanted to feel normal. Not long after, my body reminded me that normal isn't something you can demand. At first it was subtle, a tightening, a heat spreading under my skin like a warning signal, the kind you can ignore if you've spent years ignoring pain. I told myself it was stress. I told myself it would pass. It didn't. It grew sharper, faster, like my body was turning on an alarm no one else could hear. My stomach clenched, my chest felt heavy, my skin went cold, then too warm. The room didn't change, but my world narrowed. The laughter faded. The light felt harsher. Breathing became something I had to think about. I stayed calm because calm is what you're trained to do when you're not allowed to be sick. I stood up slowly, hoping no one would notice. Jimin noticed. Not because he watches me like a fan watches an idol, but because he knows the difference between my practice smile and my real face. He moved closer without making it obvious, protecting my dignity as much as my health. I tried to brush it off. I tried to speak normally. My voice came out weaker than I wanted, more honest than I meant it to be. That's when fear arrived. Not fear of pain. I've lived with pain, not fear of hospitals. I've been in rooms filled with machines and silence. This was different. This was the fear of exposure. Because when your condition flares up, it isn't just your body that becomes vulnerable. Your life does, your privacy, your story. Your suffering becomes something people feel entitled to interpret. Hoseok quietly cleared space the way he always does when he sees trouble coming and refuses to let panic spread. Namjoon stepped in with that calm leadership, giving direction without turning it into command. Yoongi's tiredness disappeared instantly, replaced by sharp focus. Jungkook stayed close enough that I could feel his presence without being crowded. Jin tried to joke, then stopped when he saw my face change, guilt flickering across his own because he loves feeding people. And when food becomes harm, it feels personal. They did what brothers do. They held the world back while my body struggled. Even with them there, I felt alone inside my skin. That's the truth about a flare-up. People can love you. They can hold your hand, but they can't step into your body and carry the pain for you. And as the physical storm rose, I felt another one forming behind it, the storm outside. The questions, the whispers, the narratives already warming up. Because in this life, nothing stays private for long. We got me out quietly. Quietly is how you get sick when you're famous. Quiet doesn't mean invisible. Somewhere someone saw something. Somewhere a message was sent. Somewhere a rumor was born. By the time I was under bright lights again, professionals moving quickly, voices kept low, I could feel the world outside shifting. That strange sense you develop when your life has been watched for too long. I lay there breathing through waves of pain, and my mind did what it always does when it can't control the body. It tried to control the meaning. I thought about that bite of food, that moment of comfort that turned into danger, and I realized something that hurt more than the physical pain. My condition didn't flare up only because of what I ate. It flared up because of everything I've been swallowing for years. Pressure, silence, the constant effort of being safe for other people's expectations. That realization stayed with me as the pain slowly eased, because once your body tells the truth, it's hard to pretend you didn't hear it. When the worst of the pain finally eased, the room didn't suddenly feel safe. Relief came slowly, cautiously, like my body didn't fully trust the calm yet. I lay there listening to the quiet sounds around me, soft footsteps, low voices, the careful way people move when they don't want to disturb someone who's fragile. That kind of quiet has weight. It tells you something serious happened, even if no one says it out loud. My breathing steadied, but my thoughts didn't. They kept circling back to the same question. How did something so small turn into this? I've learned over the years that when your body forces you to stop, your mind doesn't automatically follow. My body was exhausted, tender, warning me not to push. My mind, on the other hand, was already racing ahead, trying to predict consequences. That's a habit I didn't choose. It's a reflex you develop when your life has been watched, analyzed, and judged for too long. I could feel the shift in the air, not from the members, not from the people who know me as a person. The shift came from the invisible structure that always surrounds us. The careful tone changes, the lowered voices, the unspoken calculations, how this might look, who might notice, what needs to be managed. No one said those words directly. They didn't have to. I've heard them my entire life. Be careful. That word has followed me through every phase of my career. Be careful what you eat. Be careful what you say. Be careful how you stand, how you breathe, how you rest. Be careful, as if being human is something dangerous that needs to be contained. When I finally sat up, still shaky, the first thing I wanted wasn't a plan or a statement. It wasn't reassurance for people I'd never met. It was the faces of my members. Namjoon met my eyes first. There was no panic there, just steadiness. A quiet message without words that my life mattered more than any schedule. Jin hovered nearby, softer than usual, that tenderness he hides behind humor fully exposed. Yoongi sat in silence, the kind that means he's already thought through everything and is choosing his battles carefully. Hoseok rested a hand on my shoulder briefly, grounding me, like rhythm itself could keep me from unraveling. Jungkook stayed close, his presence calm and solid. Jimin didn't move far at all, not dramatic, not possessive, just there like a promise. In that moment I felt two truths at once. I felt incredibly lucky, and I felt deeply trapped. The love inside our circle is real. It's the safest place I know. But the world outside that circle is built to turn even safety into spectacle. Within hours, my flare-up was already being shaped into something it was. Some said I collapsed from extreme dieting. Some whispered about secret addictions. Some framed it as punishment. Some used it as proof that I was weak. Others claimed it meant I was hiding something. People who have never met me spoke, as if they understood my body better than I do. What hurt wasn't that people talked. I've accepted that comes with the life I live. What hurt was the speed with which my pain became content, the speed with which a private moment turned into public property. That speed taught me something I'd been trying not to see. There is no such thing as a small, private moment when you live like this. Even illness isn't allowed to just be illness. It has to mean something. It has to be interpreted, consumed, explained. And if that's true about sickness, then it's true about everything else that makes up a human life. Love, relationships, home, family. I thought about that as I recovered. In the quiet hours when the worst had passed but my body was still sensitive, still warning me that I'm not invincible. I thought about it when Namjoon checked on me, not as a leader managing a situation, but as someone who understands the cost of carrying responsibility for too long. I thought about it when Jin tried to cook again, carefully reading labels, asking questions, wanting to give comfort without causing harm. I thought about it when Yoongi sat nearby without forcing conversation, that deep understanding silence that says he knows what it's like to live with something invisible. I thought about it when Hoseok made me laugh softly, finding light without denying reality. I thought about it when Jungkook played quiet music, not to entertain, but to calm the room. I thought about it when Jimin watched me like he was scanning the horizon for storms. The flare-up wasn't just a medical event, it was a warning. If one meal could become a headline, what happens when the choice is bigger than food? If my body reacting could cause this much noise, what would happen if I tried to build a private life? These are questions people don't like to face in the idol world. Here, you're celebrated as long as you remain a symbol, as long as you fit into the dreams people project onto you. The moment you demand to be fully human, the world acts like you're breaking a contract you never signed. My condition responds to stress. It responds to fear. It responds to the constant tension between who I am and who I'm expected to be. That tension has been growing quietly for years. I tried to manage it with discipline, with perfection, with silence. But perfection isn't healing, it's control. And control has been suffocating me. For a brief time after the flare-up, I couldn't perform strength. I had to accept care. I had to accept that I'm not a machine. And once you accept that, the lies become harder to swallow. The lie that staying quiet keeps people safe. The lie that you can earn your right to live normally by suffering quietly. Even when I said nothing, the world still created stories. Even when I hid, attention still chased shadows. That's when I understood something painful. Privacy isn't something you can carry alone when you're famous. It becomes a shared burden. Everyone who loves you ends up carrying it too. The shame surprised me more than the fear. The shame of being sick when you're supposed to be strong. The shame of needing help when you're supposed to be flawless. That shame didn't come from my body. It came from a culture that treats vulnerability as a threat to the fantasy. I love my home. I love Korea. It's where I learned discipline, where BTS was born, where our dreams took shape. But loving a place doesn't mean pretending it's safe for every kind of human life. When a health issue can be turned into a weapon, then anything can. As I slowly regained strength, I realized the flare-up had given me clarity I couldn't ignore. My body isn't infinite. My mind can't hold endless pressure without breaking. And the people I love don't deserve to be dragged into storms created by curiosity and entitlement. The danger isn't the flare-up itself. The danger is the life that creates it again and again. That realization stayed with me, heavy and unavoidable. Because once your body speaks that clearly, pretending not to hear it is no longer an option. And deep down, I knew this moment wasn't the end of something small. After the initial noise settled, something quieter but heavier took its place. Life resumed on the surface. Schedules adjusted slightly. Smiles returned where they were expected. From the outside, it probably looked like a scare that passed, a problem handled responsibly. That's how these moments are supposed to end. Calm restored, normal resumed. Inside me, nothing felt normal. I became aware of a strange tension almost immediately. Not pressure spoken out loud, but pressure embedded in tone and timing. Concern paired with urgency. How soon can you be back? How soon can things return to rhythm? Recovery was allowed, but only as long as it didn't disrupt the larger machine for too long. I understood that logic. I've lived inside it for years. That understanding didn't make it easier on my body. My condition didn't flare up only because of food or stress in isolation. It flared up because my body exists inside a structure that doesn't truly make room for fragility. That realization followed me everywhere. Into rehearsal rooms where mirrors reflected someone who looked strong even when my insides felt cautious and tight. Into meetings where no one mentioned what happened, yet everything subtly orbited around it. Into quiet moments with the members where we didn't need to say it out loud, but we all felt it lingering. Namjoon spoke to me one evening, not as a leader managing a situation, but as someone who understands the cost of carrying responsibility for too long. He talked about sustainability, not just in careers, but in lives. About how passion can burn you alive if you don't build space for it to breathe. He didn't tell me what to do. He never does. He just reminded me that nothing meaningful survives without room to be human. Jin tried to make food feel safe again. He read labels carefully, asked questions he never used to ask, hovered without meaning to. Watching him, I realized how deeply we connect nourishment with care and how frightening it is when something meant to comfort becomes a threat. He wasn't just protecting my body. He was trying to protect my sense of ease, my trust in simple things. Yoongi checked in less often but more deeply. When he asked how I was, he meant all of it. The body, the mind, the weight behind my eyes. He understands what it means to live with something chronic, something invisible, something people dismiss until it stops you cold. He didn't romanticize it. He didn't minimize it. He respected it. Hosak brought energy back slowly, instinctively. He knows when lightness heals and when it overwhelms. He reminded me that joy isn't something you perform. It's something you cultivate carefully, especially after fear. Jungkook stayed gentle, his presence steady, his kindness unhurried. Being near him made my nervous system feel like it could finally rest. Jimin reflected everything back to me without words. I saw concern in his eyes, but also recognition, like he knew this wasn't just about health. Like he understood that something fundamental was shifting. Once you experience how easily your body can be pushed past its limits, you start questioning everything that asks you to ignore those limits. I began noticing patterns I had normalized for years. How often I delayed rest to meet expectations. How often I minimized discomfort to avoid worrying others. How often I chose silence because speaking felt like it would create more problems than it solved. Those choices accumulate quietly. They settle into your muscles. They rewire your reflexes. Eventually, your body stops asking politely. When it protests, the world doesn't treat that protest as sacred. It treats it as inconvenient. In the days that followed, recovery looked careful on the surface. Adjusted meals, monitored schedules, more check-ins. Underneath, it felt like damage control, not for my health but for perception. Conversations drifted away from how I felt toward how things might look. Words were avoided, concern filtered through optics. None of it was malicious. That's the most unsettling part. Systems don't need cruelty to cause harm. They only need fear and habit. I started asking myself questions I had been postponing for years. Simple questions, honest ones. What happens the next time my condition flares up? Because it will. What happens when I'm not able to stand quietly and smile through it? What happens when it happens after I make a choice the world doesn't approve of? Illness doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists inside a context, and my context is unforgiving. I've watched other artists endure this quietly. Health declining while their image remained perfect. People disconnecting from their own bodies because acknowledging pain felt dangerous. People convincing themselves that suffering was the price of belonging. I used to believe that too. I believed gratitude meant paying quietly. Recovering from something that could have become much worse forced me to confront how flawed that belief is. Gratitude shouldn't require self-erasure. Love shouldn't demand silence. Success shouldn't come with the expectation that you disappear as a human being. The flare-up showed me I can't keep postponing life until some imaginary future where things are easier. That future doesn't arrive on its own. You have to build it. And building it sometimes means stepping out of structures that profit from you staying small. I thought about BTS as a whole, about what we represent, about how our story has always been about growth, honesty, and challenging expectations through music. And I felt a painful contradiction. How can I stand on a stage and sing about loving yourself while living in a way that teaches my body it's only valuable when it behaves? How can I talk about healing while accepting a system that punishes vulnerability? That contradiction has been inside me for years. The flare-up made it impossible to ignore. As I recovered, my gratitude for the members deepened, for how they protected me without turning me into a problem, for how they treated this as a warning, not a weakness, for how none of them asked me to minimize it for comfort. But alongside that gratitude, clarity grew, and that clarity scared me. If my health can be compromised this easily now, what happens in 10 years? What happens when I want a life that includes things beyond the stage? What happens when my body demands consistency, privacy, safety, instead of constant alertness? These aren't abstract questions. They're biological ones. Bodies don't negotiate with public opinion. They respond to conditions, and my body was telling me something clearly. Enough. I didn't want to live a life where every flare-up becomes another reason to tighten control around my existence. I didn't want the people I love to feel responsible for managing my pain so strangers could stay comfortable. I didn't want to wake up one day and realize I spent my healthiest years convincing myself that survival was the same as living. The flare-up didn't end when the pain stopped. It continued in my awareness. In the way I saw the structure around me more clearly, it stripped away the last layer of denial. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern, and patterns don't disappear unless something changes. In the days that followed, everything looked calm again from the outside. Schedules filled, work continued, smiles returned. But inside me, something had shifted permanently. Because once your body forces you to stop, you begin to notice how fast the world tries to make you start again. That's when I understood something that frightened me more than the pain itself. My condition didn't just flare up because of what I ate. It flared up because my life doesn't truly allow rest. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. The days moved forward whether I felt ready or not. That's one of the unspoken rules of this life. Time doesn't pause for understanding. It pauses only for optics. From the outside, everything appeared stable again. Appearances were managed carefully. Energy was measured. Words were chosen with precision. If anyone asked, the answer was simple. I was fine, recovering, taking care. Inside me, that word fine felt hollow. I began to notice how often my well-being was discussed without ever being centered. Not in cruel ways, not openly, but subtly through framing, through timing, through the questions people didn't ask. No one asked what I needed to feel safe. They asked what adjustments were possible. They asked how flexible the situation was. They asked how much could be hidden without causing concern. That distinction mattered more than I wanted it to. When something happens to your body in this environment, it becomes a negotiation. Your pain enters a room full of interests that aren't aligned with healing. Schedules, expectations, markets, narratives. None of them are inherently evil, but none of them listen to your nervous system when it says slow down. I could feel myself slipping back into old habits, monitoring every reaction, measuring every movement, asking myself how things might be interpreted before asking how they felt. That reflex runs deep. It's how you survive when millions of eyes are always deciding what you mean. But after the flare-up, that reflex came with a cost I couldn't ignore. I started waking up already tense. My body braced for the day before it even began. Meals came with calculation instead of hunger. Rest came with guilt. I realized I wasn't just recovering from a physical episode. I was wrestling with the fear of another one. Fear changes how you live. It shrinks your world quietly, one small avoidance at a time. I tried to tell myself this was temporary, that once things fully settled, my body would follow. But my body didn't respond to reassurance. It responded to conditions, and the conditions hadn't truly changed. There were moments when I caught myself scanning rooms for exits without realizing it. Moments when a simple sensation, a tightening chest, a rush of heat, sent my thoughts spiraling. Not because the pain was back, but because the memory of vulnerability was. Once your body crosses that line, it remembers. I thought about how many times I had ignored those signals before, how often I had pushed through discomfort because stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. In this world, stopping invites questions. Continuing earns praise. You learn early which one feels safer. But safety built on denial doesn't last. I noticed how conversations around me subtly shifted. Words like monitoring and precaution floated in and out of discussions. Plans were made with contingency layers. Again, none of it was malicious, but it reinforced a truth that had been growing louder inside me. My health was being managed, not protected. One night, sitting alone after everything had quieted down, I asked myself something I had never allowed myself to ask honestly before. What does a life that actually supports my body look like? Not the version that survives, not the version that performs resilience, the version that doesn't constantly prepare for impact. That question didn't have an easy answer. It challenged everything I had normalized. It challenged the idea that constant alertness was strength. It challenged the belief that being needed was the same as being valued. I thought about how often I had confused endurance with loyalty, how often I had equated silence with maturity. Those beliefs had kept me functional, but they hadn't kept me well. The fear wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, practical. What happens if I can't keep doing this the same way? What happens if my body keeps saying no while the world expects yes? Those questions sat heavy because they didn't feel hypothetical anymore. I looked at the people around me and felt a familiar ache. I didn't want to become a source of worry. I didn't want my limits to become someone else's burden. That instinct runs deep in me. It always has. But I started to see how dangerous that instinct can be when it teaches you to disappear for the sake of comfort. There's a moment when concern turns into control. It doesn't announce itself. It happens quietly, through suggestions, through framing, through what's considered reasonable. And once you cross that line often enough, you forget where your own boundaries are supposed to be. The flare-up had pulled those boundaries into focus. I realized how much of my life had been shaped around managing perception rather than cultivating safety. How many choices I made based on how they would land instead of how they would feel. That awareness was exhausting, but it was also clarifying. I wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier. I felt something closer to grief. Grief for the parts of myself I had compressed. Grief for how long I had believed that being strong meant being silent. Grief for how normal it had become to ignore my own body. I still loved the stage. I still loved music. I still loved what BTS means to people. None of that disappeared, but love doesn't cancel limits, and limits don't disappear just because you wish them away. My condition had forced me to confront a truth I couldn't soften anymore. I cannot keep living in a way that requires my body to protest just to be heard. I cannot keep trusting a system to protect me when it benefits from me staying quiet. That realization didn't come with a clear plan. It came with discomfort, with uncertainty, with the unsettling awareness that change would be necessary. And change in this world is never simple. I didn't say any of this out loud yet, not because I was hiding it, but because I was still listening, listening to my body, listening to the fear beneath the fear, listening to what that flare-up was really asking of me. And what it was asking wasn't rest. It was honesty. Once honesty enters your awareness, it doesn't stay quiet for long. Even when you don't speak it, it changes how you move through the world. I felt it in my posture, in my patience, in the way I listened to conversations that used to slide past me unnoticed. Things I once accepted without question now landed differently. Heavier, sharper. Public expectations didn't pause, just because something inside me had shifted. Schedules continued to arrive neatly organized, framed as flexible, considerate, mindful. On paper, everything looked reasonable. In reality, every adjustment still assumed the same foundation: availability, readiness, consistency. The idea that I would continue to show up in the same way, just with slightly softer edges. That assumption was the quiet conflict growing inside me. When you live under constant observation, people don't need to say what they expect. You learn to anticipate it. You feel it in the pauses after questions, in the way concern is paired with reassurance that everything will be fine soon, in how quickly conversations move from how you are to when you'll be back to normal. Normal is a powerful word. It sounds harmless, comforting even, but normal for me had been built on endurance, on overriding signals, on telling myself I could handle it because I always had before. My body no longer believed that lie. I noticed how my reactions were starting to change. Small things tired me more than they used to. Noise lingered longer in my system. Crowded spaces felt less like energy and more like demand. These weren't dramatic symptoms. They were subtle warnings, the kind you miss if you're too busy proving you're okay. The public never saw this part. They saw curated moments, carefully chosen smiles, controlled appearances that suggested stability, and I understood why that mattered. I've always understood. The image isn't just about me. It carries meaning for millions of people who find comfort, inspiration, and identity in what we represent. That responsibility has always mattered deeply to me. But responsibility without reciprocity becomes sacrifice. I began to feel the gap between what people thought I owed them and what my body could realistically give. That gap created a tension I could no longer resolve by simply trying harder. No amount of discipline could close it. No amount of gratitude could erase it. I thought about the fans who worry when I'm quiet, who analyze every expression, who read between lines that aren't always there. I didn't want to give them more reasons to feel anxious. I didn't want my honesty to become a headline stripped of context. I knew how quickly concern could turn into speculation, how vulnerability could be repackaged as drama. That fear kept my mouth closed longer than it should have. But silence has a cost too. It teaches your body that your truth is dangerous. It teaches your mind to split itself in two, the part that performs reassurance and the part that carries reality alone. I felt that split widening. There were moments during work when I caught my reflection and barely recognized the person looking back. Not because I looked different, but because I felt distant from myself. Like I was watching someone else fulfill obligations while I hovered just behind my own eyes. That distance scared me more than any flare-up. I remembered why I fell in love with music in the first place. It wasn't for perfection. It was for honesty, for expression that didn't need translation, for moments when emotion could exist without explanation. Somewhere along the way, I had learned to protect that honesty on stage while withholding it everywhere else. The irony wasn't lost on me. The more I listened to my body, the clearer the conflict became. The system thrives on predictability. My body demands responsiveness. Those two things don't coexist easily. One requires control, the other requires trust. I wasn't rebelling. I wasn't rejecting what I had built. I was questioning whether the way I had been living was the only way forward, whether adaptation could exist without erasure, whether care could replace control. These thoughts didn't come with answers. They came with discomfort that followed me into every interaction, into every decision that asked me to weigh my health against expectation, into every moment where choosing myself felt like choosing instability. I started to understand why so many people reach breaking points quietly, not because they lack strength, but because they carry contradictions no one helps them resolve. They're praised for resilience while being denied rest, admired for dedication while being discouraged from listening inward. I didn't want to become another story people only understand in hindsight. The pressure wasn't explosive. It was cumulative. Each compromise added another layer of weight. Each unspoken truth settled deeper into my chest. I could feel my nervous system constantly negotiating, scanning for threats that weren't physical but emotional. How much honesty is safe? How much truth can be tolerated? How much of myself can I keep without disappointing the world? Those questions followed me everywhere. I knew one thing clearly by then. If I kept choosing comfort for everyone else over clarity for myself, my body would eventually force the issue again. And next time, it might not be as forgiving. That awareness didn't make me brave. It made me careful. Careful with my energy. Careful with my words. Careful with how much longer I could live in a space that required me to minimize my own needs. I wasn't ready to speak publicly yet, but internally, a line had been crossed. The flare-up had turned into a boundary, and once a boundary exists, pretending it isn't there becomes impossible. The conflict between my inner truth and external expectation had stopped being theoretical. It was active, and it was waiting for a decision.